Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to go over if avoidants ever commit. Do they ever commit? And the answer is yes. Many of them do. When I'm practicing, a lot of avoidant individuals do, in fact, commit to their partners. And when I mean commit, I can mean that they're in a relationship. I can mean that they have said they love their partner. I can mean that it means they married them. And so commitment is a very interesting perspective, and it has a lot of variables because avoidant individuals actually do struggle with commitment due to the fears that can come up while attempting to commit to someone. So why not we go over that so we can understand what's going on with avoidance and their relationship to commitment. So individuals with avoidant attachment style, typically more with dismissive avoidant, but fearful avoidants have a dismissive side as well. So this is for both of them. They tend to struggle with the fear of losing control. They struggle with the fear of their trust being broken. And more particularly with dismissive avoidance, they fear losing their autonomy. Within these barriers, there are also things like fearing obligation, fearing being told what to do, fearing being manipulated, which can come into trust issues. And so there are so many barriers that can end up happening to which the avoidant individual feels that commitment is a very large investment, right? Because a lot of them are even afraid of their own decision-making skills, right? In the sense that, think about if you are a dismissive avoidant, or you can try in this perspective, if you only had yourself and you've only had yourself to believe, if you lose that person, you have nobody. An avoidant individual, their decision-making skills are all they have. That's what they believe. It's not necessarily true. And so if they choose you and you're the wrong person for them, or the relationship ends up failing, they have to deal with the fact that they have to deal with the repercussions that they failed themselves. And at that point, that can be very confusing because then how do they trust themselves in any way? It's a very black and white thought, but that's sometimes why they withhold commitment, because of these things. And so they have beliefs about relationships, particularly about themselves, that they believe that they are meant to be alone, or that relationships will lead to unhappiness or suffocation, to which, again, these are not incentives to want a relationship necessarily. However, by understanding this, you can understand that if these things are not threatened, there are no barriers, or not, they're minimal barriers to actually an avoidant individual wanting to commit. Independence is one of the most important ways to allow the avoidant individual to feel that they're not losing control of themselves, that their autonomy is not being taken away, that their decision-making skills are fine because they're allowed to take their time on it. So what does independence look like? They may prioritize their work. They may prioritize material possessions such as cars, how their house looks, anything that they have, money. They may prioritize those things instead of forming attachments with individuals. They tend to form attachments with with objects, not people. They do not form attachments with people as easily as they form it with objects or pets, things that they feel they have control over. However, while they're prioritizing those things, while you're on the side of their life, you're slowly integrating closer and closer to allow them to feel like you're safe. You are somebody that's not going to take those things away. You're not threatening. In fact, you're likely an addition to their life, which is making it a lot more easier for them to really recognize that perhaps this is not as threatening. And so therefore, it gives them an incentive to hear you out and more closer to committing to you. So what are the characteristics of an avoidant individual who's leaning towards commitment? Many avoidant individuals do tend to commit, and usually what ends up happening with these individuals who do tend to commit, they have an altered belief system of their idea of you, of relationships, independence, and more often than not, I have noticed that avoidant individuals who tend to be a little bit more of the perfectionist traits, who tend to lean with more perfectionism, they tend to be the ones that are a little bit more comfortable committing, because it's almost like in their mind, things are like a checklist. And so once they make a decision, they don't go back on it. There are some dismissive avoidance and more even so fearful avoidance where they may struggle with that decision-making skill. So they may really open up to you and then they may pull away. However, those that are more perfectionist tendencies, they may take a lot longer to open up than those who are a little bit more willing to open up. However, they take much longer, but they don't take it back. Whereas some avoidant individuals, they might be very overly expressive, sometimes, very rarely. But when they do, it's so much and so overwhelming, they pull back. And those who tend to do that tend to be more in their early stages of their attachment. They might not know attachment issues, as in maybe their early 20s, teenagers, or they may have very few relationships to which they have not observed themselves behaving in relationships. And so you might see that. Whereas the ones that are more perfectionist tendencies, they may be more comfortable with their attachment issues. They may have some awareness of it and even some acceptance towards it, which is why, strangely enough, they recognize that once it's challenged, they realize that it's probably worth investing in. I'm not saying challenge in a way where you're fighting against them. I'm saying challenge in a way where you start recognizing, you show them subconsciously, you model that relationships are not inherently bad. They're not threatening. They're not scary. They're in fact in addition to your life, which allows them, as the perfectionist side of them, starting to realize, okay, if I want these things, this makes it easier. This is a tool. I'm not saying they're manipulating you, but they perceive things very tangible. And so they start seeing logically you are an addition. And so they don't fight logic. And so that's why a lot of these types of avoidance tend to lean towards commitment even more. However, any time for them can be. But what's the timeline for commitment? Avoidant individuals typically tend to take longer than secured and anxious individuals. However, that does not mean it does not happen. Often, I see at least a little bit of change within the first year of a consistent relationship with an avoidant who is willing to change. It doesn't mean they suddenly want to marry you, but I'm saying they're changing a little bit. They're warming up a little bit, sometimes even in 6 months. But at least in that year mark of consistent relationship experiences with you, so not off and on, you start seeing a little bit of change. That's where I normally see some progress. It's not always that way. It can take longer. It can take quicker, but that's a good rule of thumb, okay? So why don't we talk about some examples of what this kind of looks like, how commitment plays a role in avoidant individuals. Some avoidants actually remain uncommitted through their life, and they end up having regrets later on, early 70s, where these individuals, maybe they were married at one point, especially because in their time, marriage was much more expected. So they may have gotten married even if they didn't want to. And then they may have left that relationship. They may have been single for 30, 40 years, whatever it is. And they actually are citing regrets later on. They might express, I wish that I characterize relationships in a more positive light. I wish I didn't let my negative beliefs stop me. This is something that shows up a lot. And so it is important to recognize that some avoidants they may never commit, and that's a reality, okay? However, there are some avoidants that do commit, right? And so usually partners of avoidance who kind of wait for that commitment and show trust without giving ultimatums, without trying to manipulate them, it actually allows the avoidant individual to become secure. And these commitment timelines can allow the avoidant individual to really feel more positive about the possibility that maybe they're willing to shift that a little bit. Maybe in their mind, they expected, I'm never going to commit. A lot of them start that way. I'm never going to get married. But let's say you've been with them for a couple years now, and you really have not shown up in any other way than being supportive, being healthy, communicating your needs, but still not pressuring. And so you're actually adding to their life. And so logically, they start to recognize, I can't fight the logic. Maybe commitment is this next step forward. And so they start entertaining that thought a little bit, and you'll see that. And so what are some tips for their partner to kind of help the avoidant to be more comfortable with commitment? In general, always establishing trust. Avoidants need to trust their partner to feel secure enough to open up and commit. That's always the first one. Try to be as genuine as possible. And I know most of you guys are. I know that establishing trust, most of you guys really do attempt that. Communication. Be confident in who you are. Be direct, but not in a demanding way. And you're always assuring them that you care for their well-being while doing so. An example of direct communication could very well be, I feel like you've been showing up a lot in the relationship and I really appreciate that, but I do notice sometimes you cancel on our dates. That's something that I feel like we can work on. What's something that I can do to make this happen less often? And what's going on with you so that we can kind of manage this? Because I'm not a big fan of this. I would like that we would both try to show up more when it comes to our dates. What do you think? So you are direct. You are assuring them that you're taking your own responsibility as well, but you also want to see some sort of change on both parties, which is important. And the next one is, in general, you are prompting discussions on issues without pressure. You're establishing your personal identity, and you're also establishing that their identity will not be taken away by the relationship. So for example, let's say you say, you want to go on more dates. Let's keep talking about dates. Maybe you say, you know what? I really appreciate seeing you. I think that we have a really good time together. I'm wondering if we could go on more dates every now and again. I really appreciate that. Dates is something I like. What's your perspective? Now, early in the relationship, they might say something like, I'm not a guy who goes on dates, or I'm not a girl who really likes that. I'm a homebody, or whatever they want to say. You can say, okay, I appreciate that. I'm just letting you know that's how I feel. But you can also, once rapport is built, and you can try again, right? So let's say that's what they said the first time in the first year or two. Maybe wait a couple years, and then at that point, you can, in fact, reintroduce that idea and see where they are. Often you'll see that they are more willing to understand that maybe it's okay to adjust and compromise, and you'll start seeing this. So those are just quick tips, but this is a brief overview of the relationship avoidants have with commitment. I hope this video was helpful. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.